My name is Philip Wilson. I teach at the University of East Anglia. Today I'm going to be interviewing Jean Boase-Beier. Our Publications is bringing out the chapbook Eye of the Times by Paul Celan in spring 2021, translated by Jean. Jean is Professor Emerita and Translation at the University of East Anglia, where she founded and ran the MA in Literary Translation. For ARC she has translated poetry by Volker von Turner and Ernst Meister and Rosa Ausländer. She has written extensively on translation, particularly the translation of poetry. Her books include, with Michael Holman, The Practices of Literary Translation, Stylistic Approaches to Translation, which was first published in 2006, but was reissued in a revised edition by Routledge in 2019. A Critical Introduction to Translation Studies, Translating the Poetry of the Holocaust, and several co-edited collections, including the Palgrave Handbook of Literary Translation. Her latest book for ARC is The Holocaust, an Anthology, which she edited with Marianne de Vogt. Well, I'm going to begin by asking Jean to just introduce herself quickly and then read from Paul Celan.
Thank you, Philip. I'm Jean Boase-Beier, and well, I've already been introduced by Philip. So I'm just going to start by reading one of the poems. I'm going to read a few lines in German, just to give a sense of the German, really, and then I'm going to read the translation in English, and then we're going to just have a very brief discussion. So this is the poem Wolfsburner. Wolfsburner is the name of a plant. It's actually a dialect name for the lupin in German. And Paul Celan here is writing in response, as he was in many of his poems, to the death of his parents, but particularly the death of his mother. His parents were murdered in a concentration camp during the Holocaust. So here's the poem Wolfsburner. Leg den Riegel vor, es sind Rosen im Haus, es sind 7 Rosen im Haus, unser Kind weiß es und schläft. Weit in Michailowka, in Geisin, in der Ukraine, wo sie mir Vater und Mutter erschlugen, was blühte dort? Was blüht dort? Welche Blume, Mutter, tat dir dort weh mit ihrem Namen? Mutter, dir Wolfsbohne sagtest, nicht Lupine. Gestern kam einer von ihnen und tötete dich zum anderen Mal in meinem Gedicht. Mutter. Okay. Those are the first few lines of German. Now I'm going to read the English. Wolfsbein. Slide the bolt on. There are roses in the house. There are 7 roses in the house. Our child knows this and sleeps. Far away, in Mikhailovka, in Geisin, in Ukraine, where they murdered father and mother. What flowered there? What flowers there? What flower, mother, hurt you there with its name? You, mother, you who said Wolfsbohne, not lupin. Yesterday one of them came and killed you again in my poem. Mother, mother, whose hand did I shake when I went with your words to Germany? In, you always said in, on the Elbe, in flight. Mother, those who lived there were you, who said Wolfsbein, they who built the wolf's lair. Who is still alive? On the breath trace you live, on the breath search in poems. Mother, I have written letters. Mother, no answer came. Mother, an answer came. Mother, I have written letters to. Mother, they write poems. Mother, they would not write, but for the poem I have written, for your sake, for your God's sake. Praised, you said, be the eternal, and lauded 3 times. Amen. Mother, they are silent. Mother, they allow it, that vileness slanders us. Mother, no one cuts off the murderer's words. Mother, they write poems. Oh, mother, how many foreignist fields bear your fruit? Bear it and feed those that kill. Mother, I am lost. Mother, we are lost. Mother, my child who looks like you. Slide the bolt on. There are roses in the house. 7 roses in the house. There is the 7-branched candelabrum in the house. Our child knows this and sleeps. Mother, unlost, with us, the unlost, you triumph. And with us, the true, the just, the upright, for peace-bringing love's sake. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jean. That's an extraordinarily powerful poem. I'd like to ask you a few questions. And the first one's a pretty obvious one, really, but there are a number of Celan translations into English anyway. If I go into a bookshop, I can find them. So why do we need another?
Yeah, I mean, that is a question that people are likely to ask. I don't think it's really the right question, because it's not so much whether we need another. It's just that if you get any poetry, but very good poetry, it requires several translations, just in the same way that it requires several interpretations. It forces different readers to read in different ways. That's the particular power of poetry. And so every translator has a different take on the poetry that they're translating. And with very complex poetry like Celan's, it doesn't really quite do it justice if you get one particular take on it. So it's inevitable that people will keep translating, and there are a lot of translations, but each one is different, and each one tells us more about how different people interpret the poetry. I think that's important.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. So let me just take you up on something you said then. Well, I suppose in two questions, really. What do you find especially interesting about Salam? And what's your particular angle when you translate him, if there's all these interpretations around?
Yeah, you see, it's interesting. I think particularly with Celan's poetry, but maybe with most poetry, it's not so much the interpretations that are different, in the sense that there is a core which remains the same, or nearly the same. What's different is the angle from which people approach it, and the translators pick up on a particular aspect of the poet's poetics, and that is their window into the poetry. And I think there have been very different translations. So some translators have been coming particularly from a Jewish background and looking at the Jewish symbolism in Celan's poetry, which was highly important. And others have come from other aspects. My particular take on it is a particular aspect of Celan that I think sometimes gets forgotten, and this was his interest in language and etymology and his study of linguistics. He was interested in the way that words worked and the way that they could be misused, and this is why he revised his poems a lot, and sometimes the poetry can seem repetitive because he will take a similar image and the words will change a little bit. And I think it's an exploration of the power of language and the way it can be used to repress people, but also the way it can affect the mind, so that it doesn't feel anymore like the mind controlling the language, but it feels like the language controlling the mind. And that was probably one of his problems. He had severe mental problems. So I think that is my angle. It's the language that sort of lets me into the poetry.
That's absolutely fascinating. We mentioned at the beginning that ARC is bringing out these translations of yours in a chapbook, a pamphlet, I suppose we could say. What do you think the advantages of chapbooks and pamphlets are for translated poetry, and especially in this case, in the case of Salam?
Yeah, I think it, in an interesting way. I mean, I've spent most of my career arguing for the importance of the translator, because I think the translator is what the poet has in order to pass on whatever it is the poet has said. And the translator is important also in their own right, but in the sense of interpreting what the poet said and bringing it over into another language. However, I think there can be a tendency, I'm not saying this of any particular translator of Salam, but I think there can be a tendency, and I can see it in myself, to want to produce all the translations one has done of a particular poet. But actually, even though I've argued so much for the importance of the translator, and I believe in that, the importance of the translator is still always in relation to the original poet. Now, if I were to publish all my translations of Paul Celan, it would be a big book, and some of it wouldn't be vastly different from what other people have done. And it would also seem rather repetitive, because Celan's poetry can be repetitive and actually quite overwhelming. If you have a whole collection of Celan's poetry in the original or in English, or in any language, of course, it can be quite overwhelming. And I think one of the reasons that people don't read poetry sometimes is because it's too much almost. So the advantage of a chapbook is that you have a small selection of poetry. Often you have it contextualized, as in this case, and it's a way in. It's a way for a reader to look and say, okay, this is a particular view. This is a particular small selection. Yeah, this looks interesting. I'll maybe find out some more about this poet. That's why I think chapbooks are so important with poetry, particularly with translated poetry.
Well, I think everybody at ARC is really looking forward to this publication coming out. So once again, that in spring 2021, Eye of the Times, the chapbook of Paul Celan's verse by Jean Boase-Beier. Thank you very much, Jean, for talking to me today, and wishing you all the best for the future.
Thank you, Philip, for talking to me, and thank you to everybody for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening.